This is our discussion panel, which is going to conclude the first day of our online symposium. It's Marianna Sigala, Professor of Marketing at the University of Piraeus. It's my pleasure to chair the panel on the topic of sustainability in tourism, hospitality and events, a refreshed research agenda. COVID has made sustainability even a more urgent and important topic to be addressed in our industry. We really need to learn new things, or at least to learn what we haven't learned in the past. And I'm really happy and delighted that we have here with us 4 distinguished speakers covering academia and industry to discuss this topic. So what I'm going to do, I will first introduce the panel, and then I will give the floor to each of the members to present their major arguments and ideas. And after we've done that, I will open the floor for discussion and questions. So the first member of the panel is Dr. Jonathon. He's an associate professor in Purdue School of Hospitality and Tourist Management. He has written more than 50 academic articles and chapters, and he's the author of Introduction to Sustainable Tourism and Responsible Travel, and co-author of the Tourism System 8th edition. He is the lead investigator of the Sustainable Tourism and Responsible Lab and chair of the Travel Care Code and Initiative. Welcome, Jonathon.
Thank you.
Second in the panel, we have Dolton, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Intercontinental Hotel and Resorts since 2018. She leads the company's Journey to Tomorrow 2030 Responsible Business Strategy and all the ESG reporting. Prior to this, Catherine was Global Head of Investor Relations, leading all activities and communications with institutional investors and sell-side analysts. Catherine is Treasurer of the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance and a member of the Business in the Community Global Goals Leadership Team. She has an MA Natural Science from the University of Cambridge and is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and the Wales. Thank you, Catherine, for joining as well.
Hi there, great to be here.
Our third member is Dr. Xavier. He's Professor of Sustainability Marketing at the University of Surrey. He researches and develops methods of sustainable tourism production and consumption. He consults on sustainable product development, marketing and communication, and he's currently serving as the advisor in Prince Harry's Travelist Coalition of Amadeus, Booking, Google, Expedia, Skyscanner, Travelport, TripAdvisor, and Visa. He conducted the stakeholder consultation of sustainability matters for the European Commission's Tourist Transition Pathway. He has delivered over 150 courses for more than 5,000 tourism businesses on how to market and communicate sustainability. He is currently the principal investigator for the University of Surrey for the 23 million Interreg project experience to develop low-season sustainable tourism visitor experience in the UK and France. Thank you for joining us, Xavier, as well.
Thanks, Marianna. You've just reminded me to send a shorter CV next time.
That's okay. We have the time, and I think it's important that people know the background of everyone, so they can probably direct some more targeted questions as well. But thank you again. And last but not least, Professor Stefan Gössling. He is professor at the School of Business and Economics, Linus University, Sweden, as well as the research coordinator for sustainable tourism at the Western Norway Research Institute. I'm sure you have heard from all of them, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Stefan, as well. And I will open the floor to your interventions. I have asked each of the members to give us their perspectives on some important topics, I would say. COVID has made more evident that sustainability is important. It accelerated the need to address the issues, and it also made evident and more profound some of the impacts of climate change, overcrowds, over-tourism, and bad practices that we really need to follow. So the questions I have asked our discussion members to reflect on and give their perspectives are, what have we learned, if we have learned anything during COVID? What do we need to really learn? What do we have to unlearn? And what new we have to learn to address sustainability in a better way? Jonathon, would you like to start first?
Absolutely. It is such a pleasure to be here this afternoon, to be joining with you and sort of addressing this wonderful question, you know, what is the refreshed research agenda post-COVID? And I don't know about your own experience with COVID, but for me, I was privileged in that I was able to take the time during which COVID was at its worst for some reflection. I think a lot of the world was able to do that. I was fortunate in that I didn't get particularly sick during the process. I was away from it. And so for me, it was a wonderful opportunity to sort of stop and think and reflect on what was happening in the world. And so, you know, one of the things I think we learned during this process is that the world does go on without tourism. I think many destinations, and I use the idea of the other guy blinked, you know, for so long, the conversation around sustainability was that, around sustainable tourism was that, well, you know, if there's no tourism, there's going to be all of these consequences. But they were vague and they were conceptual. And during COVID, we learned what the world is like without tourism. That gave us some insights into some of the negative impacts of tourism, but it also gave us some insights into the positive sides of tourism as well. And there are definitely communities who are very eager to re-welcome visitors coming in. So I think what we learned was what happens when tourism goes away. And it reminded us how important it is that we really work on ensuring that tourism is sustainable. We need to remember to relearn that sort of notion that the tourism has a why. During this time of reflection that I was fortunate to have, we saw many destinations going through the same sort of thing. And one of the challenges, or certainly one of the trends that were identified during the last couple of years, is this notion of resident-focused tourism development. And I sort of look at this, I would observe that as a pendulum swing. We are relearning the answer to the question, why do we have tourism? And in the past, as tourism has grown organically and exponentially, we've often sort of framed tourism in terms of the visitor experience and the visitor. The customer is always right. I think what we had, the chance we had to relearn was to relearn that tourism actually is a tool for economic and social development. And that many communities have taken that pendulum swing from being, this is all about and only about the visitor experience, damn the community, to this is about enhancing the quality of life of our communities, and tourism is a means towards that. And so recognizing that purpose of why we promote tourism has been a useful moment as we come out of it, come out of the COVID side of things. I think if I were to just briefly sort of say, the things that I looked at and struck me as being really important over these last couple of years is the importance of thinking big and small at the same time. As I think about my research agenda, that's what I'm doing. And it might not seem, it's not what you might think. When I'm talking about thinking big and thinking small, I'm talking about simultaneously looking at the systems issues associated with sustainability. How do we interact? And I think that quite often sustainability is talked about too much as a single entity at a single level, destination level, and we need to be much more nuanced, recognizing that sustainability is actually a portfolio of activities, and it happens at a variety of different levels in our social system. And we need to start looking at not only the big system interventions that are happening, but also unpacking that and looking at the specific actions that we need to be taking. So at the same time, looking big and looking at the specifics as we go. So that's a starting segue and conversation there to get the ball rolling. And I think it's time for somebody else to take on and talk about what they saw as they think about a refreshed research agenda.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathon. I think you really pinpoint to two important points: well-being and community. You also mentioned about resilience, the ability of communities to survive or to manage to survive without tourists or to realize the impacts of tourism. And definitely looking at sustainability from, I would call it probably an ecosystem approach, micro, meso, micro, and probably the interrelations between all entities at all levels.
Exactly.
Thanks again. Catherine, what's your perspective from an industry expert?
Thanks, Marianna, and hi everyone. It's great to be with you this evening. So just a little introduction to IHG so you can sort of understand my perspective, because as I was saying to my esteemed colleagues on the call, I don't have a research agenda, but hopefully I've got some useful perspectives for you all. So IHG Hotels and Resorts, we have over 6,000 hotels across 100 countries, 17 brands, so everything from Six Senses, Intercontinental, Holiday Inn. And the important thing for us is it's largely a franchise business. So that means that by and large, the hotels that fly an IHG brand are independently owned and operated. So that's a really interesting dimension for us and was really important actually during COVID. So I had quite a different COVID experience to Jonathon. We spent a lot of time, as you might imagine, as a big business, thinking about our own staffing structures around costs and also how to support those small businesses. So as you'll all know, our industry was so badly hit. Really understanding how to support those owners and their staff through the crisis was sort of the number one concern. We pivoted, so my team looks after sort of the environmental side of Journey to Tomorrow, so the planet as well as communities. So really we pivoted our whole team towards thinking about that community support. So again, hotels are so often at the forefront and the center of the communities they operate in. Many of our hotels were either housing frontline workers, they were COVID hotels. So really thinking about, how do we support them and pivot our actions? They were in London supporting homeless people. So really a very, very different focus for those hotels and those operating them. So it was a very, very tough time. And then obviously coming out of the pandemic, there have been some very big challenges for businesses. Economic uncertainty going through this year. Obviously, the war in Ukraine has had ongoing supply chain impacts. Staffing impacts are another major issue. So I think there's been ongoing business issues, but I would say more widely from a sustainability perspective, if I think about waste is a good example. We learned a lot of things during the pandemic. We can just take stuff away. So, there was so much that could be taken out of hotel rooms from a hygiene perspective, that we've not put back. And that was great, because it was kind of a, you know, the world's biggest pilot. All hotel companies like to pilot initiatives. That was a great quick pilot for us. So we learned a lot about, you know, things that could be taken away and not missed, and we've kept those out. I think there's been a lot of learnings around just people really experiencing, you know, when people weren't traveling, just the beauty of their natural environment. So I think that sort of brought really a greater recognition and desire to maintain the beauty of one's surroundings. So again, I think there was a question, and I can't even believe this was a question, seeing as where we are now, whether, you know, the carbon agenda would still be high on business agenda coming out of COVID. And obviously we've seen that it is, which is great. And I think the big thing for us actually is corporate customers. So, you know, we've seen a definite shift in expectations among those who stay with us, driven by that consumer expectation, and just more mindful and conscious travel, I would say, as well as, of course, you know, customers having their own carbon reduction targets, which in turn gets passed on to us. So I think that's been a really welcome output of that. And I think just regulation has helped as well, right? So there's increasing regulation in Europe, in the UK around climate change for businesses. So I think that has really helped to shift those expectations. So I think, you know, we are continuing to see the impacts of COVID, the impacts of the general cost pressures in business. And it's really, I would say, focusing those actions around energy consumption in particular at this time. So I think, you know, from an industry-wide perspective, from the corporate side, there have definitely been some really good learnings when we think about the sustainability agenda, but the ongoing difficult economic environment can make some things quite difficult to execute. I will leave it there.
Brilliant. May I please ask you to clarify or to give some more examples before we progress and we probably move to another topic. When you say you see clients to be more mindful, particularly from the corporate sector, can you give some examples how this is demonstrated? Because from our, let's say, experience or research that we are reading about revenge tourists. Tourists, not particularly from the corporate sector, the leisure clients actually taking revenge and behaving more badly than even before COVID.
Well, I think so I'm talking predominantly about corporate customers here. So we have a sort of an annual process, the RFP process, where big corporate customers will reach out to us for details around our hotels. So they make their selections, which hotels are going to stay in, which hotel companies they're going to stay in. And increasingly, they've got questionnaires around sustainability. And it covers kind of, you know, a wider remit, often around human rights, purchasing policies, really quite wide. So what we're seeing is, and I think a lot of it is driven by obviously their pressure to be responsible businesses, but I think there's a lot around specifically carbon footprint, because as you know, if you think about, you know, big hotel companies, major clients, it's the consultancies of this world, and you know, their biggest part of their carbon footprint is going to be their scope 3, so their travel. So they're wanting to get data on us. I don't think they're using it to actually make their decisions yet. That they're not using it as a, you know, still primary consideration is going to be cost and location, but they're definitely gathering that data to, at some point, I think, really switch those decision makers on, because, you know, they in turn have got some fairly lofty targets, many of them by 2025. So I think it's again driven by target setting and the need for them to show progress.
Nice, very interesting to hear that. So it's not really the final consumer asking that, it's the corporate purchasing policy officers, whoever.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, and Xavier, you have experience dealing both with academia and industry, so you probably can give us an insight into what is happening between them as well, and what dilemmas are happening.
Yeah, that's right. So I wanted to reflect on three things, and continuing from where Catherine was at now. One of the big changes I've seen is how corporations have completely changed the way in which they're working on this. And so, just like Catherine was saying now, it is going to be the business traveler that changes this, not the leisure traveler. And over the last few weeks, both Amadeus and Travelport have just joined a coalition with Booking, Trip, TripAdvisor, Expedia, Google, all of which are basically saying we want sustainability metrics for all the suppliers that we are distributing through our online travel agent channels. So if any of you, for example, have ever used Google Flights to choose your flights, you'll see that next to the price and the location and the duration, it tells you the carbon footprint for that particular flight and whether that's above or below average and by how much. And we're using this to nudge consumers to do things differently. The same is happening with Skyscanner. But we're now talking to all the corporate clients and they're saying, well, like for real, we can get these for every single flight everywhere in the world. So if I have to fly from Zurich to London and I have essentially Zurich to London, you have about 50 different flights available per day. And I can tell you which one has got the lowest carbon footprint. So as a corporate, you're saying, I have to go anyway, right? Why don't I choose the flight that's got the lowest carbon footprint? Because it makes a very little difference for me if I go, slightly earlier, slightly later. So we're seeing change in that sense, and both Skyscanner and Google are changing here. And we're seeing the same when it comes to the supply chain of big, online travel agents. So I've been working with Booking.com, and essentially we now have data on sustainability practice for more than 1 million accommodation businesses, of which 400,000 we're sufficiently confident with the quality of that information that is now being showcased on the Booking.com website. And as a consequence, is going to be on the Google Hotels and on Expedia and eventually on TripAdvisor and Trip. And we're now working through different nudging techniques to see how we can change consumer behavior as a result of presenting the information in different ways. The scale that we're working at is completely different. You remember the days when we talked about certification programs being 10,000 businesses across the world, and for 20 years we were stuck at that. So something is really changing at a fast pace. But then, so that's good news. The bad news, okay, and there are always bad news with academics. What I've noticed is in times of plenty, everybody progresses. In times of recession, it is the most vulnerable people that pay the price first. And so research that we have just done for the World Tourism Organization showed that women have lost their jobs much more often compared to men in the hospitality sector as a result of the COVID crisis. Women tended to be the ones that had part-time jobs. They had hourly contracts or zero contracts. And they had lower paid jobs. They were much more replaceable for jobs that could be mechanized or jobs for which we could save some of the costs. So Catherine alluded to the need for different cleaning practices. For a while, we had many more cleaning practices. Later on, we offered to customers to not have the rooms cleaned. All the jobs that were either needed or not needed as a result of that were jobs mostly done by women, and so on. So the result that we saw on data, we've just collected 2,000 questionnaires for World Tourism Organization in Jordan, another 2,000 in Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, and Mexico. And we found that in every one of those countries, women suffered much, much more the consequences, both for mental health and for well-being overall, for the need for caring for others, and for loss of earnings by loss of jobs in tourism. So on the one hand, so when we talk about tourism, I think we need to break down who are the winners and who are the losers, and not talk about the tourism industry anymore. Just like Jonathon said earlier on, there's no such thing as the tourism industry. So I'll stop talking now because I want to hear what Stefan has to say.
Excellent. Thank you, Xavier. And yes, let's hear from Stefan, and then we'll open the floor for questions.
Yeah, there's so much to say, and we had to start when I mean, you guys were pretty optimistic. We have learned, but reading between the lines, I really wonder where we learned at which point, because obviously, when we talk about COVID, everything seems to be set to get back to where we've been. The building back better stuff is just rhetorics. I can only say that most of the changes that we've seen are management changes in order to preserve the model, maybe make it a bit more robust. But the big question, when have we seen change? And I think the real change we're seeing right now, and that is not because of COVID, it's because of the other crisis. It's because of the Ukraine war and the cost of energy that has gone up, and everyone being in panic about the energy bills that are surely coming up. But I'm also pretty fascinated with people, because we're all sitting here with 2 pullovers on and trying to save by eating in pubs and that kind of thing. But at the same time, have things really changed? I mean, my neighbors came back today from a trip to Australia, and you really wonder, how can you travel to Australia, burn like 4 tons of fuel for holiday when everybody is in panic about the cost of energy? So at some level, I think what I've learned more recently now is that, and it probably started with the toilet paper wars, if you remember early 2020, that people are very selfish in crisis situations. That is the first thing. I haven't heard much about, some kind of solidarity that has come out of the pandemic. It's like everyone has just protected their assets. Think about politicians caring mostly about older people, not at all thinking about what the pandemic would do to youth, that kind of thing. But then also a lot of people try to profit from the crisis. I mean, we have seen many structures become worse. I think in the first 3 months, Jeff Bezos' fortune went up by 48 billion, if that is correct. So I really wonder, what have we learned? Because I'm not seeing that at the macro scale. I'm thinking in many respects, we're in a worse spot at this point. Why is that? Because, most tourism actors are more indebted. They have fewer options of actually engaging with sustainability. The energy crisis will force people to think differently, but it's not a voluntary process guided by insight. It's not even a structured process that is guided by politics. It's just something that is forced upon people. And if that is what makes us change behavior, then I'm a bit afraid of the future. I'm afraid to say. Where does that leave us, really? I think in terms of a research agenda, the next crisis that is coming up is climate change. We haven't had much debate about the origins of COVID. Everybody seems to accept it came somehow into existence, probably from China. Nobody knows what the exact reason might have been. Investigations have been prevented, I'm sorry to say. And everybody seems to be fine with that, which to me is a big issue. Also, we haven't discussed much about the vectors of the pandemic, which is air transport mostly, and how that might be a factor in the next crisis. But irrespective of what is coming on the virus level, because I think we can all agree that something will come again. We have had so many viruses before, so another one is probably in the making right now. But climate change is the big crisis that is really looming in the background, and it's no longer far away. I've started to work with climate change at a time when it still was far away, but now it's almost on a daily basis. You can see what climate change is going to do, and the kind of ignorance that I see on the side of policymakers, but even tourism decision makers, is just staggering, because I think it's clear that it won't take another 30 years before we are all going to find ourselves in a very, very bad spot. So my conclusion here is that if we talk about sustainability, we can probably scrap a lot of research that will just not have relevance in the longer run. We have to focus. It's in my opinion, climate change will be a key issue to deal with. And obviously, I'd hope that we would see more research in regard to, the management of the whole thing, decarbonization, obviously, and also the barriers, because I see all too many papers that present scenarios that are technically perhaps feasible, but will never see the light in the real world. So I think that's where I'm standing at this point. I think we need to get real, and we need to get real fast. That is what I think.
Thank you, Stefan. I saw that you took a much more macro systemic political governance perspective in terms of what is going on and what we should probably be tackling. I also saw that a lot of emphasis is given to environmental sustainability, climate change, although many of you have mentioned issues about equality, fairness, gender, discrimination, particularly in terms of employment. I haven't heard anything about cultural or social sustainability, but I'm sure it is an urgent or important issue. If I may try to dip into some more of the concepts you have identified and some of those that I said are important. Catherine, if somebody would ask you, what have you changed, if you have changed something before COVID and now, what is this thing in terms of practices of sustainability? If you have changed one or two things, or you operate in a similar way.
I think to Stefan's point, I think there are so many not bigger factors, but there's been so many factors in the last year that have kind of just built on the COVID impacts, that it's very difficult to say what was sort of COVID driven and what has been wider economic driven, I would say. The big thing for me now is the climate agenda, and how as a business we are able to meet our business targets whilst delivering on our climate targets, because we are very dependent on our third-party owners to implement certain measures around decarbonisation in particular. And they're suffering still, they are, even if we can say this will reduce your operating costs, if there's any upfront capital cost, they cannot do it. And just the capacity as well at a hotel level, even if it will save the money, they do not have the staff to actually even check guests in, clean the rooms. So really it's that, for me, it's, the ongoing climate crisis and the need for business to take action and try and get that response as quickly as possible. I think that has been a step change in our organization. If I think about, my role beginning of 2020 versus now, and just the amount that we've integrated the actions into the business, I would say there's been a step change, but we need a step change more.
I see. And you really have identified the issue that Jonathon mentioned before about the systems approach. I mean, your clients pressing you and you need to respond. I think Jonathon wants to say something.
Yeah, I think one of the things in terms of thinking about this from a big picture point of view is that these are intersectional. You know, Xavier talked about the you know, the impacts on women in the workforce in these cases. You know, this is not separate from climate change. This is a part of climate change and climate change impacts. And, you know, I think we're going to see, you know, to your point, Marianna, you know, we didn't talk about cultural change as a result, cultural and heritage issues, and yet, you know, cultural and heritage issues are interconnected with these issues of climate change as well. So part of what we need to be dealing with in our research agenda is thinking about how are these things interrelated with each other and how are they impacting each other as we go along. You know, the other thing that I think we need to do is understand and you know, how messy human beings are. As you know, we want to believe that if somebody's educated, they'll change their behavior. This is not the case, right? And you know, we create nudges because we know that they don't. And you know, I think that one of the areas that I'm interested in at the moment is the diffusion of new technologies. And in hotels, there are so many different stakeholders, from the brand to the owner of the hotel, to the management of the hotel, to the manager of the hotel, all of which can impact, you know, a carbon related decision. And if we don't see those nuances, then our research really isn't addressing the challenges that are presented to us at the moment. We're dealing with a hypothetical where, in fact, you know, Catherine and her colleagues really need help, you know, in researching the reality of life, as opposed to, you know, the notion that these things will happen because we think they will.
Yeah, but we love our ivory tower too much, don't we? We are the first that point fingers at everybody else, saying the world must change, but I'm not prepared to. Look at what we are researching. How much of what we research would Catherine find useful? Now, let's assume for a second, Catherine, that you are the kind of person that genuinely wants to make good change. Like academics, we are skeptical of corporate sector all the time, right? But what research do you need us to do that will be helpful to you, as opposed to the kind of things that we're probably doing right now? Because we tend to assume that we're doing amazing research, but you're not going out of your way to find it, and it's on you to not use our findings. But probably not like that. So what would help you?
Something that I've asked Willie about before, who's on the call, I know, is something that we and linked to the work that you're doing, Xavier, is this: how to put a value on the consumer demand for more sustainable hotels, because that would help me to build that commercial case for our owners. So I can say, you know, we can get some good data around, you know, you put this energy conservation measure in place, this is your capex, this is your, you know, your operational cost savings, this is your return investment, blah, blah, blah. We can do that end, right? We can do the cost end. But what really gets the attention of certainly our owners and our own internal operations folk, if we can say, and this is what's likely to happen to the top line, this is what's going to happen to demand.
So we need to help you say, how will it increase the volume of sales? How will it help to increase customer satisfaction, which is another form of reaching more sales?
Maybe price.
How will it help you increase in customer expenditure, increase in repeat visitation, increase in recommendations, anything that is a typical commercial KPI? Exactly.
So it's linking that back to the you know, the commercial hard data, because the problems I have every day is linking all of this back to the commercial reality of the situation that our third-party owners are finding themselves in. Because us, you know, we want to keep our owners happy, because we want them to sign more hotels with us, because we are a listed company. And, you know, back to my old days of investor relations, you know, back to the, you know, we have shareholders who are measuring us predominantly on our key financial measures, one of which is growing our system.
But this sounds to me like the business of business is business again, and in terms of sustainability, and I think Stefan is ready
So totally
to say something.
unaligned with what we propose. Sorry, guys, this is just business as usual in a different way. And we're past that point. We have to think tourism differently. And obviously we have to optimize, but we also have to raise a great number of questions. And one is, can we be guided by the economic bottom line all the time? And if yes, if that is the only thing, can we at least question that volume growth is something that needs to be more critically seen? And then third, what is realistic in terms of how we decarbonize in a way that's aligned with the science-based targets? I don't see these questions coming from industry, and I'm not going to play devil's advocate. Well, yeah, I will be playing devil's advocate. It's my perfect role. Anyway. So the question must be, which level of change can be handled in which way? We have to turn the whole thing around and ask, how can we, first define a trajectory in terms of emissions that's still acceptable, and how can we then build tourism around that in a way that is still profitable for businesses to continue on that basis? And I'm not seeing anyone asking these questions. Look at aviation, which is the sector I've wasted 25 years of my life with. It's just the same old kind of, well, we'll fix it somehow. And, people are not aware that the same narratives on how aviation is going to become green in the future have been around for 30 years now. And I think it's time really that industry gets more critical on where we are, because otherwise this will all end badly, and not in the very far future. It will end badly in 10 to 15 years, in my opinion. And then it's no longer a question of, did we live up to KPI expectations? It will be more disruptive than anything you can imagine. And people still don't see this, even though the signs are all there.
But how can we really change the mindset? And what is the responsibility of us as academics and researchers to facilitate this? Xavier, I know you're editor of a very important journal, and you have an overview of many papers being submitted and published. What is your opinion on that? Are we on the right track in terms of what we are researching, what questions we ask, and
we're asking the easy questions, right? So we're looking at research that's easy to collect, surveying consumers, surveying employees. It's an easy way of creating a structural equational model by putting together 4 different constructs that already existed, but you may have put them in that order for the first time. And so that may have some rigor, but has relatively little novelty and very little significance to the problems that we're considering right now. So those papers are increasingly being rejected. And we're finding ourselves with very few papers that when I first read them, I say, I am excited. I want to read this paper to the very end. And to me, that should be a fairly good sign of whether we have seen some of those papers, but not as often as I'd like to.
Mm-hmm. So my question is basically, how sustainable are we as researchers as well in terms of effort and resources we spend on conducting research?
Well, it's an interesting question, because when James Heim and I wrote the editorial on the hypocrisy of sustainable tourism lecturers flying all over the place, I have never received so much hate mail from my own colleagues as I did on the back of that particular paper. Now, of course, during COVID, I have been able to not fly for work, but for a really long time, people basically just said, well, if you're not prepared to fly to my conference, I'll just ask a different keynote speaker. And I was just thinking, but it's a conference about sustainability and you want me to talk for 15 minutes. It really doesn't make sense to fly 4 hours each way, right? Like, so like Stefan was saying, there has to be a different business model that allows us to still achieve what we need as society without having to have the really unsustainable consumption. And somebody will say, yeah, but you're a middle-aged white guy who's already done a lot of flying, and now you can basically try to have a moral conscience. But, you know, at the stage I'm in my own career, I don't have the luxury to say that. Well, possibly, but we generally have to find a way of flying differently or traveling differently and achieving what we need. What are our human needs, and how to fulfill those human needs in a very different way? I mean, Catherine, you'll have noticed how people are flying less for work and how the mix of your customers has changed over the last few years. Mm. And the other thing that we've all seen is at the moment, every 6 months, we have a new crisis. You know, so crisis management is one of the kind of key subjects we all need to learn how to teach, right? Yeah. So, but we're not there. So I no longer want papers about COVID submitted to the Journal of Sustainable Tourism, because we are not called the Journal of Tourism History, right? And a paper with data collected during or before COVID is a historic paper.
Yes, well, you make me feel a kind of not guilty now that we are online discussing this issue instead of flying around and doing the symposium in person. So probably we have a positive impact on that. We have few minutes left, and I would really like some perspectives and opinions about an issue that the industry is facing quite severely during the last year, and it's an issue that persists. And this is about talent management, lack of talent, and the well-being of human resources in the industry. Who would like to start saying a few things about this? Jonathon, you're the only one with the microphone on.
That was a mistake. You know, I think that workforce, you know, this comes back to this idea that quite often we talk about sustainability like it's a monolith instead of a set of activities, a portfolio of activities. And, you know, core to the sustainability of our industry, climate change notwithstanding, is the idea that we can attract and create effective careers for people as they come through the industry. Every politician who stands up says, you know, that the industry is going to create jobs. And what we're not doing, or what there's work to be done on, is making sure that the jobs that we're creating are worthwhile doing, that they're paid, you know, in sufficient ways, that they have opportunity for growth and for, you know, human engagement, human development. And so, you know, this is, and you know, again, all of these issues sort of overlap. The idea of the poly crisis, right? But what the last couple of years have taught many people is that, you know, there are other jobs out there that I can do that have better conditions under certain circumstance. And so the sustainability of the industry is really reliant on us thinking deeply about how we can create, you know, roles for people, not only at the entry level, but also at the middle management and top management levels, so that this is an industry that, you know, is seen as being noble and worthwhile engaging our time and energy into. So, you know, yes, I think this is a challenge, and this is a sustainability challenge. It's for the whole sector, for the whole system. So
the thing is that the more we digitize the industry to make it sustainable, the more we automate it, and the less opportunities for careers and opportunities we make in the sector as well. I guess somebody will need to find the balance in terms of employment, careers, talent, and digitalization. And it's also the issue in terms of how do we give, how can I say, decent conditions for somebody to work from all perspectives: salary, careers, knowledge, well-being, and everything that somebody needs to live and prosper. Catherine, what's your insight from the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned before, it's been an extraordinary year. If I just talk to colleagues, operations facing colleagues, just in terms of the amount of turnover we've had, even sort of at the general manager level, it's been extraordinary this year. I think a couple of things we've seen. I think we've seen our workforces become a lot more local. So, there haven't been as many people sort of moving. Well, whilst there's been a lot of turnover within countries, workforces are becoming much more local within specific geographies. What we're trying to do is, I think that, we're trying to attract more people into hospitality, into hotels as a career. I think historically, at the luxury end, it's seen as being as a good career, and people can really see that career pathway. But, if you go down into sort of the mainstream, it's not seen as a particularly attractive career. So doing more around, we do quite a lot of work with young people, getting them into our hotels, competitions, so they can just get some insights into what a career in hospitality might look like, especially for the more disadvantaged kids. And also we have something called IHG Skills Academy, which is an online platform we launched a year ago, which has it's got all kinds of skills on it. So it's quite new. We're building up that repertoire, but it's got everything from super simple stuff that can be applied to any industry around interviews and what to wear for an interview, that kind of thing, which is accessible to anybody, no matter who they are. So again, it's just kind of providing, I think, skills and just making it an exciting industry for somebody to think about, well, actually, that would be a great career option for me. So we're doing a few things because it is such a big challenge, especially as all the big hotel companies are growing. So they want more people to work in their hotels.
Very interesting, particularly about the skills development that you mentioned, because if it is true, what I read in McKinsey research is that most of the companies in various industries during COVID and still now, they're recruiting based on skill rather than knowledge and expertise in the industry. That was their strategy in terms of how addressing the talent gap or the human resource gaps that they had to go through. Okay, so there are a few minutes left. I would like to finish the panel with a negative or pessimistic tone. I would like you to give me one optimistic direction or idea where we can, what we can do to make things better. From where shall I start? I won't target Jonathon again. I think I bombarded you a lot. Stefan, you were the most pessimistic.
The most realistic.
The most realistic.
I take your point. I've been working with this for too long. I probably have too much knowledge on certain things that are just not funny anymore to watch. Positive. Actually, I'm the most positive in my whole life and career as a scientist right now. And why is that? Because we have the energy crisis, and nothing has triggered the thinking and the reflections on everything, because people start to realize climate change is not something that is in the future. It's here. That might be secondary, but most important, we have an energy crisis now that is related to climate change, and we have a geopolitical crisis that is also related to fossil fuels. And it's been very, very important that we've been hit with this kind of thing, with the force that we've been hit, because in the past, I've always been thinking, if only politicians could have a decent timeline, tell people that, you know, the cost of carbon is going to go up by 5% per year, we would all have a timeline to relate to, could adjust our businesses and so on. But frankly, at this point, I think we would have the, you know, the frog in the pot effect, where, you know, the slow heating of the temperature doesn't trigger any reaction other than defiance. And now we are in the situation where everybody's actually thinking about it. And this is as good as it gets, in my opinion. We have people taking action. I think there's a lot of stuff going on. Unfortunately, we have all the greenwashing already, mostly coming from aviation again. All that is a nuisance. But by and large, the problem is acknowledged and we are working on it. So just go ahead.
Good point. We have learned the hard way. Now we have to learn what to do as well. Xavier.
Right. We are rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Okay. It's just way too late. We need to look at
That's your positive?
That's my positive. How about that?
It will have a happy end.
But I mean, we need to think about climate justice, you know, because we keep talking about as if this is going to affect everybody. The people who are taking the decisions are people with money. They're not going to suffer first. They're not going to suffer as much as others. Okay. So I don't see how this is going to end up well. Okay, frankly. In the meantime, I think that there are businesses, and Catherine is here demonstrating one of those businesses that are trying to do the right thing, that are working really hard to make change. We are seeing the potential to create changes, and we know that when we are under a lot of pressure, we can create change. I think we're all aware that the chances of having no change are zero, right? So it's now a question of working on adaptation at the same time as looking at long-term mitigation. And I'll try to call that a positive.
Brilliant. Thank you, Xavier. And Catherine, what's your message?
I can feel Stefan's frustration, but, you know, and I know that none of us are doing enough, and that's my day-to-day battle, right? It's that balance of pushing. How much do I push without, you know, being being shut down? I think a lot of change has happened. It needs to happen faster. I think for me, one big thing that helps me is reporting requirements. So TCFD in the UK and the requirement to publish a climate transition plan is kind of going to be a big tool for me to get action. So I do think that, I know it's very slow, but things are moving in the right direction. But yes, I can feel everybody's frustration, and I do share that.
Catherine, let me interject there. Have you noticed how governments are putting all the pressure on companies, but they're not actually regulating themselves?
Yeah.
I mean, this is just so unjust.
Yeah.
Right? You know, like, because I keep looking at what national tourist boards are trying to do, and they're not changing their policies. And I keep saying to them, can you change your marketing practices and stop targeting the most faraway customers in the world to come to your country? And they're basically saying, well, I'm not interested in that. Now, if every one of our governments following the Fit for 55 strategy has to reduce carbon by 55% in the next 8 years, and governments, all they do is put responsibility on large corporations, and they don't help small companies, and they're not changing themselves, that's not going to be enough.
Well, everybody has to do what they preach. Hopefully.
Yeah. And every outlying European region is basically trying to say, we are asking for exceptional status. You know, like, oh, I am Crete, I am Cyprus, I am an Indonesian island. You know, I shouldn't have to reduce my carbon footprint for as much as somebody else. And you think, well, that's okay. But every time you want to reduce yours by less, somebody has to reduce theirs by more. You know, who's going to take that additional burden? We're not seeing it. So when I was helping the European Commission put together the tourism transition pathway, and Stefan and I kind of had some conversations around that time, it was messy because everybody's pointing fingers at somebody else to create the change.
This reminds me of a basic human behavior.
Yeah.
Well, Yeah, and
Jonathon, I started with you, I'll finish with you.
fair enough. Thank you so much. You know, what I hear is that, you know, we're messily working towards some system change, right? And we're starting to think about, you know, what I feel positive about is that we're recognizing that many of these problems are interrelated and you know, tied to issues around climate change. And I hear different sectors looking for change. You know, one of the challenges, you know, and I think to the plea that you're making, Stefan, is that we need to change the system. And so where are the points in the system that we can leverage change, to use the Danella Meadows analogy? You know, where can we leverage in there? And many people are looking to do that. I think you're right, Xavier. Everyone thinks they're exceptional. And, you know, when we get past that and realize that we're all in the same boat, that is going to be a step forward. I would just finally say that there are parts of sustainability that I am excited about. And one of them is this notion of, and I'll just wrap up with this idea. I think that we have an opportunity to really leverage the energy around regenerative tourism. The idea that for too long we've been sort of talking about sustainability as just not doing the wrong thing. And, you know, so many different pockets of people around the world who are saying, no, not doing the wrong thing's not enough. We want to actually make this place better. And I think that that's tying into some of the resident oriented tourism that we're seeing in destinations. I think that this is what's come, you know, leading to discussions about net positive activities and approaches that the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance is sort of envisaging, you know, changes to the way we build buildings, changes to the way that we do activities. And so while I remain cautiously skeptical of where regenerative will take us, I think that it needs to be embedded and mature. I am excited by the energy of so many different people embracing this idea that things can get better if we use tourism effectively. And so I'll wrap up on that because that's my best optimistic point.
Thank you. Well, we have to do the right things and we have to do them right. So we have to be sustainable and we need to do sustainable things. Thank you, everyone, for all your contributions. It was really a very inspiring and triggering discussion. I am already reading a lot of positive messages and comments from all our audience, and I really appreciate that. Thank you again, and hope to see every one of you again discussing some developments and achievements of what we have presented today. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.